Hi, this is Dr. Anastasia Chopelas, and I'm really excited to be a part of this conference that is introducing new techniques in the world of integrative medicine. I have been asked so many times, being a physics professor, about how do I integrate the physics that I did into the energy healing that I do. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to talk about specifically what I've done to help improve and amplify healing results and actually improve people's intuition. In other words, that still small voice that you hear inside your mind. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is my background a little bit. So I spent 40 years in a laboratory measuring vibrations of matter. So what I did, and you can see some of the equipment over there on the right, what I did was I shined laser into a crystal, usually a mineral, and I was able to measure its vibrational properties. And from these vibrational properties, I was able to extract almost every property you can imagine. And in that field of work, I published 50 articles and book chapters that appear in journals all over the world. Well, I tell people that I'm a vibrational spectroscopist, and on the left is a picture of a cell that I used to use, and inside the middle of that cell, if you look very carefully, you can see that there's a diamond in there. So in those 40 years of research, I used to use diamonds as pressure anvils and change the interatomic distance and understand how the vibrations changed inside the material. So that is the reason why I call my method the diamond healing method. And that is also the same as the title of my book, The Diamond Healing Method, Get Healthy No Matter What Your Doctor Says. That title says it all, doesn't it? So when I discovered about 30 years ago that I could tune into the vibrations of people and I could hear their thoughts and feel their feelings, I started to study more of the esoteric sciences and discovered that it was a really good match. About 20 years ago, I got so sick I only had 2 good hours a day. And I went to all kinds of conventional doctors and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And the fortunate thing is that I was living in Germany at the time. And during that period of time, I discovered that they are very far advanced in alternative healing methods. And at that time, I also learned that I could channel energy with my hands. And so out of necessity, I needed to discover a new way to heal myself because all the old ways weren't working. That process was a little bit too slow for my taste, and I asked people why. I asked them, where does the energy go? And they told me, well, the energy knows where to go. And I thought to myself, well, what if I directed it? How would that work? And I learned many years later that it worked quite well. What I'd like to do is first talk about the conclusion. So the conclusion is that the addition of vibrational physics to energy healing improves it and amplifies its effects. It makes it faster, more effective, and you'll see in the upcoming talk. But there's a secondary conclusion that I've come to in observing everything. The secondary conclusion is that in working with what people see or call the spiritual world, the 5th dimension, or the quantum realm, I see that there is a reflection of the physics principles in our world to that realm. And I actually think it's the other way around. My suspicion is that we as divine beings created this world, and the physical dimension is actually a reflection of that creation, or in other words, in the spiritual realm. Well, I'm going to let my geek hang out here. Really, I'm going from physics to metaphysics. And when I look at a crystal like this peridot crystal, which is a very fundamental crystal to the Earth's mantle and meteorites and so on, and it's actually a gemstone that you see people wearing. And when I look at that, What I see is on the right is a series of atoms that are connected together by bonds. The bonds have strength, the atoms have mass, and the strength of the bonds and the mass of the atoms, and that's dependent on the distance apart, can tell me a lot about what's going on in the crystal. You can determine the total amount of energy in the crystal. You can determine its heat capacity, its entropy, which is another way of calling it your mixed upness, and all sorts of other things, even its volume. So I want to show that these fundamentals of vibrational physics, how those things can apply to the healing world. And the advantage to doing that is that it gives people a visual grasp of ways to think about things to help improve their healing. I have discovered that when others have applied these things, and it makes it very easy for them to understand and to hang on to, instead of just saying send the healing energy there, but instead they imagine something that's very easy to visualize, that it's very effective. And I'm also going to talk about concrete examples of applying these simple principles to energy healing and how they amplify the results. And I also have several case studies. I've worked with well over 400 people these last couple of years, and they've all experienced some sort of medical miracle that includes things like regenerating kidneys when the doctor said that couldn't happen. People with asthma, they've stopped needing their medication. You know, all kinds of incredible miracles that I never would have imagined if I had thought about this several years ago. Now, this is a way to wrap in vibrational physics into energy healing, and that sounds like a lot of words, but these are simple things that you can visualize that you've seen in your everyday life. And these things that I'm going to talk about fall into a few categories. The first one is the diurnal secretion of hormones, and these are cyclical, and they happen on a daily basis, and it could happen on a monthly basis. And what that is a wave interaction with matter. So it's the wave interacting with the gland that's doing the secreting, and it controls the amount of hormone that's secreted. The second is the blocking of harmful energies, which is a filtering. The third is using a Fourier transform, and what that is a mathematical function that allows you to translate time into frequency space. And I'll show some very specific examples of that will allow you to imagine what it is that we're looking at in the other dimensions. Third is that resonance and overtones for removing low energy emotional or blocks. And what that means is that a lot of things in your body resonate at a certain place, but it can also resonate at its overtones or a higher frequency, and that helps you remove those low energy emotions. The right-hand rule for the flow of energy into or out of the body. If you've taken a simple Physics 101 class, you would know that the right-hand rule is showing you how you can determine which way energy is traveling, and specifically electromagnetic energy. So if you have a flow of current along a wire, you use the right-hand rule, or if you look at how an electromagnetic wave is propagating through space, you have this right-hand rule, and I'm going to show that to you in detail later. And the reason why this all came about was so many people were asking me, can you teach that to me? So I started a school called the Scientific Healers Academy, and I have people that are already showing results within the first and second sessions. So I'm going to show some of the things that I teach in this class. And most of you know that there's all kinds of energies. These are the energies that we study in physics. We have electromagnetic energy, which operates in a transverse fashion. In other words, if it propagates in this direction, then the wave is oscillating transverse to the direction of motion. And we have chemical energy, which is stored up in the bonds of chemical compounds. We have sound, which is longitudinal. In other words, sound, when it travels, the vibration of the sound is in the direction of its propagation. We have electrical energy, as in electrons moving through a medium. Vibrational energy, which is really thermal energy, and then nuclear energy, which is the energy that's stored up inside of atoms. Now in humans, we know from recent studies that there's lots of energy in the body, and the energy can be reflected in all of those things that are listed on the left side. But on the right side, we see that the energy has, that our thoughts, our emotions, our intentions, our actions, and our connection to others also contain energy, and all of these are reflected in the biophotonic, bioelectric, and so forth signatures in the body, and there have been a number of measurements that show this to be the case. So one of the ways they've been quantifying it is by measuring the bioelectric frequencies. And the thing that's really fascinating is if you look down the list, in which I've ordered it in basically a numerical order, that you see that a normal healthy brain function will be at 70 to 80 megahertz. And you start looking down, as you go down, you see healthy heart is 60 to 70. And then disease begins when we start dropping below 60 megahertz. And you can see that the lower the bioelectric frequency is, the more ill that person is, until right before death they're measured a 20 megahertz, which is very low. The other thing that's really fascinating about these kinds of studies is that when you have a positive thought, you can raise your measured frequency by 10 megahertz, and when you have a negative thought, you end up lowering it by 10 to 12 megahertz. And that prayer will actually raise it by 15 megahertz, and so will meditation. And I know that energy healing must do something, because when I work in a hospital, and I was working on a particular client who had been in a bad accident, had a serious brain injury, he was hooked up to all sorts of meters, and wires were coming all out from all over the place. And the doctor said that he would die in a day or two because his brain activity was so low and the intracranial pressure was so high. And while I worked on him, all of the alarms started to drop away, and all of the meters dropped dramatically. In fact, the intracranial pressure dropped from 21 down to 7, so it dropped to a third of its original value. So I know that while we do things, we can actually change the way, just sending energy from one body to another, sending love, sending caring, can really, really change dramatically the effect of the vibrations of a human. So in the first case, that first example that I named, that is the diurnal ebb and flow of secretions, and that is wave interacting with matter. So what we have here is the pineal gland, which is in the central part of the brain, and it secretes melatonin, which brings on sleep or an altered conscious state such as a meditative state. And in this case, I had several people that had a lack of sleep. And I know that melatonin is what, from the pineal gland, is what helps govern sleep and helps bring you into that meditative state. And what happens is that I started working with a client who had no energy whatsoever. So I boosted all her energy systems, which included the thyroid, the liver, the adrenals, and also the brain glands. So I was working on those deliberately targeted in such a way that she became very energetic. In fact, when I was talking to her on the phone, I do most of this on the phone, when I was talking to her on the phone, she said she felt her whole body tingle from head to toe, and then she had more energy than she had in years and years, and was running around the house, and she said she had a new problem, that she wasn't able to sleep. So I thought, well, maybe I'll work on her pineal gland. And what had happened was that the pineal gland started sending out too much melatonin, and she says she couldn't keep her eyes open during the day. So I thought, why don't I overlay a function in which the melatonin would go up during the evening and down during the morning and up during the evening. So it had to be a slightly complicated function in which you had a narrow rise and a large depression. So I just overlaid that function to take care of this lack of sleep. And what happened is that this particular woman, a 68-year-old female, she had had a significant immune crash, so she was on antibiotics for 40 years and also had to take gamma globulin shots every month. That particular part of her body improved, and then when I overlaid this periodic function, her sleep cycle became normal. So I thought maybe this was a fluke, and I tried it again. And I had a 66-year-old female who had just had a mild stroke. She survived quite well. All of her function improved, but she had confided in me that she had been taking melatonin for 28 years and couldn't sleep without it. She just said it would just completely escaped her. And so then what I did was I did the same procedure that I had done in the previous case. And I told her, please leave off your melatonin for tonight and see what happens, and call me in the morning. So she called me in the morning and told me that she had slept perfectly through the night. She didn't even wake up, and she thought she would try it again. And I talked to her periodically over the next 5-6 months, and she said, I still don't need my pills. And another case came to me in which the woman could not fall asleep before 3 a.m. and then would end up sleeping until noon, and we shifted her sleep cycle by the same technique. So just overlaying a simple wave, interacting with the matter, in other words, interacting with the secretion cycle, completely changed how these people were getting sleep. So in this next series of images, I'm talking about the biophotonic field. And what that is, it's the aura that a lot of people that have these skills that are well tuned and developed, they can see these fields, and they call them auras, or the body field, which is produced by the activity, the energetic activity that's going on in the body. And in the upper figure, you can see that the field that is shown in this Kirlian photography is complete, and in the lower image you can see gaps, and those gaps are produced by injuries or illness. And Dr. H.S. Burr measured these things using very simple methods with a voltmeter, and he found that embryos carried a blueprint that were approximately the size of the adult. He found that as soon as you exposed a mouse, for example, to cancer cells, that within a day or so you could see these gaps on the mouse around the area where the cancer would then later develop. And this is just within a day. So that means that the energetic field around our body registers things almost immediately. And I know from the work that I do that I can expand the field very easily by pushing it out, by pulling it or pushing it out. And what that does is it really protects you. And the holes mean that the body is weak, can be invaded energetically. So that means that thoughts that you don't want to have could appear, feelings that you don't want to have. Let's say you're going in a crowd where there's a bunch of people shopping and there's a big sale going on. They're all around a table and they're all frenzied and kind of greedy, and I want that and I want that. And you kind of pick up that thing as sort of like what happens in mob mentality. Well, this is a way to protect yourself from all that, because I really don't want to have those feelings when I go shopping. And people in this situation get frequent headaches, or they have unexplained pains, nausea, low mood, they get ill very easily, and so forth. And one of the things that people don't realize is that this can change very, very easily. Kirlian photography is measuring the field around this particular finger, and you can see that this field is a lot stronger than this particular finger. And this was an experiment in which one person was told to draw energy out of the other. So they called the person that was drawing the energy the vampire, and the person that was giving his energy up as the victim. And this is part of our makeup because we're social beings and we're built to connect. So there is a way to transfer your personal energy back and forth, but we don't ever need to do that because we're surrounded by energy and we can draw it in from ourselves, and we don't need to take from other people. But a lot of people don't realize that. And we are meant to be able to exchange like that because we're social beings. And a lot of times if you don't know what's happening, you don't know how to protect yourself from it. So I wanted to show the body field that's around the body. This is an illustration from Barbara Ann Brennan's book. She is one of those people that could see these body fields quite easily since she was a child. We can expand our own body field. If you look carefully, you can see a conical area around the top of the head and the bottom of the feet. And that looks a lot like the magnetic field around a solenoid or around a magnet. And that's what it reminds me of. You know, when I look at it energetically, that's what it reminds me of. And we can grow them and shrink them depending on our own personal energy and how much energy we draw down. We can also plug everything up, but a lot of people don't know to do that. And as I mentioned, when I worked with a coma patient, I changed the meters by drawing energy down and pumping it into him, and that also changed his field size. You can also put around yourself protection from drawing down of energy, and it can be provided by a filter. And I developed this to help stop the headaches and the body pains that a lot of my clients were getting, because I could tell that they were being psychically attacked. And the reason why I got this idea is that I looked at a book by Dr. David Hawkins, and what he did was he took people and when they were in different states of emotion, measured their energy via a muscle testing technique. And he found that the average of humans is 180 worldwide, which is here right above the fear arrow. And when you reach up to the level of 500, which is love, that's when spontaneous healing happens. Because when you start pouring love into somebody or even yourself, you will help with your healing. You're going to raise your energy, as we mentioned in that chart with the bioelectric fields. We change, we go up and down during any one day depending on our emotions and our moods. And when we're in a very loving state and a very giving state, that's when healing occurs. That's when our quote-unquote vibration has been raised. And there is a corresponding high energy emotion, such as love, compared to a low energy emotion, such as neutrality, for example, and I'm going to show that later. So this is, love is 500 and neutrality is 250. And for me, the opposite of love is not hate, but it's neutrality. That means I am not interested. And happy thoughts, as I mentioned earlier, cause us to vibrate at 25 megahertz higher. And we have 4 basic emotions: fear, grief, anger, and happiness. And of course, happiness is everything that's above 500. So after working in an optics laboratory for many years, I got to understand how all the filters worked. And one in particular was a bandpass filter. I thought, well, what if I can filter out those low energy emotions? So let me try this way. And I understood that bandpass filters, what they did, if you look at the scale right here, you see that the shortest wavelength, which is the highest energy, is in the purple range, and the lowest energy is here in the red range, and this is at 360 nanometers, and it goes all the way up to double its wavelength. It's like an octave in music. It goes up to 720 nanometers. And you can see when we get about halfway down, which is in that 550, 560 range, that this line here, which represents the transmission of light going through this particular filter, is almost nothing. And as we start dropping to very short wavelengths or higher and higher energy, you see that this curve rises up and allows the high energy or shorter wavelengths light through. And this is light interacting with matter again. In other words, it's the filter. So the filter is drawing that low energy light out. And this color is called Italian Blue, and this is the company that makes this particular filter color. And you can see that these colors, I went searching on the internet to find those colors. I got 2 different colors, but in actuality it's somewhere in between. And in the film that you'll see in just a moment, it looks a little bluer than in reality. It's a blue-green color. You can see that you've got green coming out, you've got blue coming out, and a little bitty bit of purple. So in other words, if somebody, it's like a cloak of invisibility for negative people or negative energies. And I wanted to point out that at the bottom of all of my slides, I have a spectrum. People call it a rainbow, but it's a spectrum to me. It's my nerd showing again. And this spectrum shows that the long or low energy wavelengths are in the left side of your diagram, and that's in our past because we read from left to right. And as you go up in the scale, you see that in your future you're going to have higher and higher frequencies until we end up with the shortest wavelengths of light. But I also happen to have a sheet of this color, and it is this beautiful blue-green color. And what it does is it blocks all the low energy frequencies and allows the high energy frequencies of light in. Now, I did that because I thought, well, maybe it'll work, because I was having a lot of people that were having trouble with the negative emotions coming in, and it was affecting them in a bad way. They were going through a lot of pain, migraines. And so the first person that I did that on had suffered for 10 years of migraines. These 10 years of migraines, she had gone to all sorts of practitioners, conventional medicine practitioners, integrative medicine practitioners, allergists, everything you can imagine, acupuncturists, massage. She went to regular doctors and had even 2 surgeries with no resolution to the migraine problem. And as soon as I cleared all the negative energy out of her system, she had accumulated quite a bit. I cleared all that out. I did a general healing on her body, and I put a shield around her with that particular color. And what happened is that the headaches almost immediately stopped, and she only has them occasionally now. And then I thought, well, I'll try that again. So I tried that again on a very sensitive 2-year-old. We call them indigo children. And he can see energies as well as his parents can. And he had a very bad flu in his tummy, and he was complaining, and they tried to get him help, and it just wouldn't go away. So I could see that he was being attacked somehow psychically. So I pulled that out, and then I put this shield around him. I created what I call a quantum bubble. And you may have seen those scalar devices in which you can put on your phone to protect yourself from the radiation. So I felt how that felt, and I recreated it energetically, and I put this color around him. And the result was that he got well almost immediately, and he stopped being attacked psychically. So that problem completely went away. And this continues to be a standard practice, is that when I tell people when they go in crowds, if they're starting to feel that way, just imagine themselves enveloped in that blue-green color, and they say, especially the really sensitive ones, say it really helps. You know, these are people that are empaths, psychics, mediums, these people that have this connection with the other world and with other people. This really, really helps a lot. So I want to demonstrate here and talk about the interaction of waves with one another, because in reality, there's not one single wave out there. We have waves of all sorts of frequencies that are interacting with one another. And it's good to know what happens when they combine. And in the top picture, you see the 2 waves that are of the same exact amplitude and the same exact frequency, when they combine, they co-add to create another wave of the same frequency but has double the amplitude. Now, if you take those waves and you shift them by 180 degrees, those two waves will combine to get nothing. It goes flat. And the amplitudes are additive, and this is called interference. So you can have constructive interference. Normally you think of interference as something stopping you, but in this case it means that the two waves are interfering with one another. In other words, they're interacting and they're creating a new wave. And as we mix them up, we will cause new frequencies to arise due to the differences, and eventually it'll muddy up what we have inside of us. So in this lower picture, I show two waves. One is at 50 hertz and the other one is at 60 hertz. And when we add them up, we end up with something that looks like a wave that is equal, that has a frequency that's approximately the difference, or exactly the difference, between the 50 and the 60 hertz, and we end up with a 10 hertz wave. And this is an example of how you create beat frequencies. You will have heard them if you've tuned a guitar or a violin, and you pluck the one string that's next to the other. You put your finger on one of the frets and you pluck it, and when you pluck the two of them together, if you hear kind of a ooh and faster, you know that those two waves are at different frequencies, and that is this particular phenomenon. Okay, so let's look at constructive and destructive interference visually. You may have seen this before, but what we have is like a tub of water, and we're poking your two fingers in at the same time, and you're bouncing them at the same exact rate. And what happens is that when you're doing that, you're creating these circles, and in the circles along these lines you have destructive interference, and along these lines you have constructive interference, because you end up with much brighter and much darker crests and troughs, while along here everything has been destroyed and you end up with no crest and trough. And you can demonstrate that for yourself in your own bathtub. So let's talk about what happens when we have all kinds of frequencies added up. And on the left side of the diagram you can see this irregular shaped line, and what this is time along the x-axis and amplitude along the y-axis. And there is a mathematical connection between the time and the frequencies that are contained within it. And we can perform this mathematical function on it, and when we do, we go from time versus amplitude to frequencies versus amplitude. So we divide these down into its various frequencies, and you'll notice that on this side time is on this axis, and in this case it's frequencies here, and there is no time dependence. This is simply a deconvolution of all the frequencies contained in here, and you end up with simply frequencies without time. So if I were to sing a single note, for example, you would be able to break down that note into its composite frequencies by running it through what we call a Fourier transform. Now, I'm not going to show you the mathematics. You just need to know that it takes time versus amplitude and it translates it into frequencies, which has no time dependence whatsoever. So here is a picture of that. On the top image, I just sang the E note from the guitar, and I recorded my voice, and you can see that there is a complex function, and it looks like it's periodic complex function. And what I did was I found a little app for my iPad that does a Fourier transform of whatever note you are singing or whatever sound you're hearing, and it breaks it down into its composite frequencies. So what you see in the lower image is the breakdown of that note, and you're going, wait, you sang one note, why are there several spikes of frequencies on the graph? And I'll break that down into the next couple of images. Let me explain what that means. Is that every instrument, your voice, strings, pipes, and so on, has a fundamental, which has and this is the longest wavelength that can vibrate on a string or in a pipe, for example. This is this longest wavelength. The wavelength is actually double, because the wavelength is an S, just like this right here. This is one wave. And it can also vibrate in a manner in which the wavelength is now half. So it's 2/3 of this length. And now the wavelength, you get two waves within the string. And the thing is that each doubling of the frequency or halving of the wavelength is an octave. So when you go from here to here, it's an octave. When you go from here to here, it's an octave. And these are when you pluck a string, you actually see all of the other waves showing up. If you sing a note or play an instrument, all these tones will come out all at once. And I thought, well, how can I see that? And I thought, well, if I had an instrument that would do a Fourier transform, and I know they exist because I used to work with one, I could do that. So what I did was this is a picture of my iPad, and I'll show you that in just a moment. So what you see above here in this top image is the views of the frequencies that exist when you pluck the high E string on the guitar. It has a fundamental of 329 Hertz, as it shows down here. Don't mind these jaggies, because it is the iPad has a very, very primitive program and primitive sound system compared to something you would use in a laboratory. And the bottom image is me singing the same E note, but in this case with my mouth wide open. And these higher notes are closer to the healing energies that are in resonance in our body. So this is an important point. And the overtones are a multiple of one another. So if you take 329 and you double it, you get 658. If you triple it, you get 987. If you quadruple it, you get 1316, and if you multiply it by 5, you get 1645. So here's the first, second, third, and fourth overtone, and you can see that there are ones that are further, and you can see that the voice imitates exactly the guitar string. So when we talk, we not only have our fundamental tones, which match the sound, which match this particular frequency, the 329 Hertz, which is just right above middle C on the piano. That's the E, that's 2 notes above the C, middle C. And I want to show you this little free, in case you want to geek out along with me, there is a free iPhone, iPod Touch, or iPad app that's called Spectrum Analyzer, and you can see where you can deliver more healing tones by opening your mouth. So I'm showing you this little film that shows this iPad in action, and if you watch the display closely, you can see what happens when I open my mouth a bit wider. I went and looked for a program for my iPad that would allow me to analyze the frequency, because I wanted to see what my normal tones and normal frequencies were on my voice. I started reading about the healing frequencies, and I did things like I did the Om sound, and I also plucked my guitar to see what I would see, and then sang the note. So I sang an E note, ooh, and I noticed that the overtones were kind of suppressed. So then I sang the E note with my mouth open, ah, and you can see that the overtones, the fundamental and the overtones appear, And the overtones are much stronger, and those overtones are the places that the healing energy occurs, especially when you're at certain frequencies that align with the heart, like the 528 hertz. So all these fundamentals and overtones are actually resonating in you, and it resonates in your body. All kinds of things can have resonance in them. For example, this bridge, which if you've taken any fundamental physics classes, I'm sure that you've seen it. This is the Tacoma Narrows Bridge that was finished in the 1940s. And resonance is when the frequency of the receiver matches that of the sender. So this is really important for receiving the emotions. So if you have somebody that you're having loving feelings towards, in order for them to receive your emotion, you have to be able to be resonant with it. Let's say that the emotion is anger, then you will also receive that if you're in resonance with it. You can see that here is where the wave rises and here is where it sinks. So this is one wavelength from span to span. And what was causing it was that the wind was gusting at exactly that frequency. So in building and bridge construction, if you don't pay attention to the resonant frequency of something that's all put together, and the frequency is determined by the weight per unit length and the total length, that if you don't pay attention, within 6 months of the construction of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, it collapsed. Fortunately, there were no victims here, only a dog that was too afraid to get out of its car. And they rebuilt it later, of course. This disaster could have been prevented if they had put added cement along the way to change the weight per unit length. So in the body, we have a system that's similar to your guitar strings, and that's our meridians. I also call them your body channels because it sends energy up and down them. And these channels have resonant frequencies just like strings on the guitar or your voice, and they come in matched pairs. So we have the heart with the small intestine, the spleen and the stomach, the lung and the colon, the liver and the gallbladder, the kidney and the bladder, and the glands with the sexual organs. And these pairs will hold like emotions. So these emotions have a wavelength, and these pairs will hold these like emotions. The meridians actually vibrate on certain notes. And this was through the work of Dr. Scott Walker and his predecessors, and they call it the neuro-emotional technique. And they discovered via muscle testing and by doing a release technique that chiropractors do, by doing a release technique along certain meridians, they were able to release those negative emotions out of the body. And what he's done is he's shown these pairs of meridians, which are the meridians that are connected with all of those organs that I showed in the previous page. And like I said, that grief and sadness tends to reside in the heart and the lungs. So the lungs here show grief, and anger and rage can live in the liver and the gallbladder here. Anger, resentment is here in the liver and the gallbladder. And fear and terrors will reside up here in the bladder and the kidneys. That's why when some people are very afraid, they let their bladder go. Now, some of you may or may not have seen these diagrams. These are diagrams that are studies of people that are self-reporting where they're getting warm or cold when they've been shown images to create, these heat maps. So this is opposite of what a physicist would show, is that the yellow and the red is the warm areas, and the blue and the dark blue are the cool areas, and you'll see that in a few moments. And so you see that in depression, this person got cold on his limbs, And when somebody is angry, they got hot in this area, in the top part of their body. And when they're happy, they're warm from head to toe. And when they're feeling love, their entire torso and head are feeling nice and warm. So that gives you some idea that the connection of these meridians and our emotions have a great connection, and you can see that they can be turned on or off. So this is a high energy emotion, and this is a low energy or low frequency emotion. I use energy and frequency interchangeably because they are interchangeable. In the physics world, energy is equal to a constant times frequency, and that constant happens to be Planck's constant, and you'll find out why also in just a few moments. So energy and frequency, if you have high energy, you have high frequency, and frequency and wavelength are inversely proportional because the speed of the wave that's traveling is equal times to the frequency times the wavelength. These are very simple principles, so frequency and wavelength are inversely proportional. So what I want to show you is that on that chart from Dr. David Hawkins, we see that if we go down by half, for example, this is one octave lower, we go from love to neutrality. And then we go from desire down to grief. And in the case of willingness, we go down to anger. These are opposite emotions. And in the courage, in courage, we go down to fear. Now, they say that this is a geometric scale and that anything above 200 is a good thing to have. I tend to operate up in the love and above area because I am healing people all the time. I cease to have an ego while I'm doing this, and I'm channeling high energy towards my clients, my VIP clients, and towards my students when I'm teaching my classes to help raise their energy as well. So as you can see in these cases that when you go up and down by half of what we've got here, we end up with opposite emotions. So what I do when I work with people is to release the negative emotion. So I ground the emotion, the area in which the emotion is, to a grounding cord. It's an imaginative line of energy from that particular organ, and I let the negative one out, and then I pulse double the frequency in. And what that does is it helps release whatever negative emotion there is, or whatever low energy emotion there is. So in the case of a 53-year-old woman who had contracted an STD from her former partner, is she couldn't form a new partnership, and this had gone on for 8 years. And on top of that, because she constantly radiated this sadness or this depression because she had this STD, and she was also angry at him, her business suffered because people can feel those emotions as you come by, because we are the perfect receivers and we're the perfect senders. So what I did was, when I connected with her, I did that procedure. I connected her grounding cord to her emotional, the area of her emotional upset. In her case, it was lungs and liver. And I drained that out, and then I replaced it with double the frequency emotion. And what happened was that she immediately released that anger and that sadness, and her business started booming. I don't know about the partnership. I haven't talked to her lately because she's so busy conducting business. And in the second case, I had a 67-year-old woman who carried anger towards her father for 40 years. She could not even look at him. She was so angry at him. And I connected both her liver and her gallbladder down to the grounding cord, let those low energy emotions, I pushed them out of the way, and I brought in double and quadruple those frequencies to raise those frequencies to higher levels. And what happened was that anger dissipated in no time at all. And on top of that, the next time I talked to her, she says, I can't even muster anger against my father. And on top of that, her business over the next year increased by 50%, and she did not do anything different. She went to no new networking meetings. She did not buy any extra advertising. She just said her phone is ringing off the hook, and she doesn't even know what happened. So a couple of other things that I wanted to mention is the chakra or portal system. And if you'll notice in this body that the nerves, that we have clusters of nerves that go from our spinal cord towards the front of our bodies. Now, if you know anything about the portals or the chakras in the body, you'll notice that they are in exactly the same places as where the nerves come up and come across from the spine up to the front of the body. So, for example, this is the throat region. This is up towards the third eye. These around the waistline are going towards the solar plexus. These down here are going towards the sacral area, and the ones that are pointing downward are our root. We also have, along with the collections of nerves, we also have a series of receptors, and these were discovered in the 90s when they were Candace Pert and her thesis advisor discovered that there are these endorphin receptors that align along the meridians of the body. And prior to that, a medical doctor said that those can't mean anything, and they must be something that's like a religious belief, because they couldn't find a physical structure. And when they discovered all these receptors were along those lines, and they are particularly clumped along the front and the back here, and there's one towards the top, which is part of the cerebral cortex, is up towards the top, and then we have our roots that are down at the base of our spine. And their main function is to receive, and we can also send energy to a certain extent. So, for example, the one that's in the center of the body feeds the heart, the lungs, the breasts, and the thymus gland, and the solar plexus feeds a whole variety of organs that sit in the whole abdominal area, including the pancreas, the stomach, the adrenals, the kidneys, the liver, and the gallbladder. And each joint and your hands, the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet also have these openings. And they open and close. When you feel threatened, they close down, much like the iris of an eye does when your eye is being exposed to too much light. So they close down to protect you. And if you're in an abusive situation for a long time, such as being in a dysfunctional family, you find that they'll close down permanently, or that it'll be more or less a daily occurrence where they're closed down. And some people even force them closed. Some people can feel the energy flow. I can feel the energy flow. If I put the palm of my hand somewhere, I can actually feel it in my palms. And I can also feel the various layers of my body field by just putting my hand up here, and I can feel where I hit a barrier, my skin on my arms will tingle. And I discovered that many, many years ago. Like, people would blindfold me and they said, what figure am I drawing? And I knew exactly if it was a circle or a square or a triangle. So there are many of us that are sensitive to these subtle energies, but you can also show it visually. Oh, and I also wanted to touch on what some of the emotional meanings or the psychic meanings of what these openings stand for. And if you start thinking about where they are in the body and what it is, it makes a lot of sense. So the number one is the red spot on the Vitruvian Man is our root, and that connects us to the earth, and it stands for survival. The number two is where we create life from, and it's our creativity and our sexuality. Number three is our solar plexus. This is the area that martial arts calls your hara, which is kind of like your center of being. That's where you get your oomph and your force from. So we say that's our will. Our heart is our love and connection. The throat is expression, our verbal expression and verbal creativity. The third eye is where we see things that aren't there. That's our intuition. And last, the crown, which points up. Everything else has pairs front and back. The last is the crown that points up, and that connects us to our spiritual world. So we can see this flow of energy, and it follows the right-hand rule. So when you, and you can imagine this, people say, well, I don't see anything there, and it's really hard to measure. So you can imagine this magnet that's stuck on the back of this mineral. You can't see anything around it either, and when you put your hand there, you don't necessarily feel much of anything until you bring a piece of metal to it, and you can see that it attracts the metal, and you can control it by moving it around. You can control it. Almost any object that's got a pointed shape like that can be moved by the fields of the body. So the field of the body, we can see it. If I put this particular pendulum over the back of my hand and hold it as steady as I can while I'm standing here, you'll see not much happens. It just wiggles back and forth because I'm wiggling back and forth a little bit. And if I move my hand to a joint area, you can see that it starts to bounce around and it'll start to rotate. And I'm not moving my hand any more than I did before. And I can get it to swing quite large without doing anything with my hand. You can watch it. And it's actually rotating. If I were to look down at my hand, it rotates in a clockwise direction. And what I've illustrated here in the image is the right-hand rule. If the field lines are going in the direction of my fingers, the energy is traveling in the direction of my thumb. That's the direction of the current. And if you look at the vibrating image of a light wave, the rule is still the right-hand rule. So the vertical is the electric wave and the horizontal is the magnetic wave. So the rule is electric wave to magnetic wave, and that gives you the direction of the wave travel. And that direction also follows the right-hand rule. So in the case of my wrist, you can see that the energy is going in. And you can also demonstrate it by putting it over your heart, and it will, a lot of people's hearts are quite open, and it will really start to move around. And I have done this for a number of clients, and some people are closed. And so what I do is I help create that vortex of energy by rotating my hand and pulling it out. So I'm rotating it to get the direction of motion in that clockwise direction. I start rotating it and I start activating the energy. And then when I encounter a block, I can feel it. I encounter a block, I pull the block out, drop it down. And so I reopen that opening to allow the body to be fed. And just in doing that for all of the openings and also in the joints, shoulders, elbows, wrists, knees, ankles, hips, just doing all of that and opening up the hands and the feet energizes that person so much that a lot of people that have had nothing but fatigue for years on end, they start to feel way better. They're doing quite well. So to summarize some of the things that I've shown you, some of the techniques that I've shown you in the talk, techniques that are very simple to visualize, simple to imagine, and they're based in simple and straightforward vibrational physics that allows people to have tools in their hands to be able to protect themselves or improve their health by energy healing. So the first thing that I showed you is I overlaid a cyclical wave to cyclical secretions, such as the diurnal secretions of melatonin or the monthly cycles of hormones. The second thing that I showed you is protect the field from those that would draw your energy down by putting on a bandpass filter that blocks out the low energy frequencies or vibrations and keeps those things away from you, and it improves the well-being of many of my clients. So, and the third thing that I showed you is replacing the low energy emotions with higher octave resonances. So in other words, we ground the meridian and the organ to our grounding cord and send down those low energy emotions, letting them drain out, as you've heard in many of the meditations and healing audios from others, and including my own. And what we do is we send in higher octave resonances into those areas and help relieve the body of those low energy emotions, and it relieves the person of the anger or the sadness or the shame, all of those things that are vibrating at a very low level. The next thing is I showed that if you open the portals or the chakras to let the energy flow in, we use the right hand rule to help let the energy flow in, so you can help move the energy around according to the right hand rule. So I am again showing you the conclusions that I showed you in the beginning. The addition of vibrational physics improved the results in both speed and effectiveness when you look at just these simple techniques, very simple techniques. And I'm all about creating very simple things that everybody can understand, because we all have the ability to heal. We all have this ability. We all come with the same exact equipment. So why not use them? And these techniques are so simple that I am teaching many people how to use these techniques, and they're very effective. By just imagining the color around you, it protects you. Just by imagining that you have a wave that's superimposed on the secretion of your hormones. Let's say you put it on a monthly cycle or a daily cycle, however they come through for you, that will improve. The second conclusion is that in working with what people call the spiritual world, I have noticed that every physics idea that I've tried, and I've tried many more than these are just a little introduction to this greater course that I put together. This is a little introduction of some of the things that I'm doing, is that this other dimension, the spiritual dimension, whatever I try in the world of physics seems, in the vibrational physics, seems to really translate into how those subtle energies from the other side work with us. And like I said before in the beginning, that my suspicion is that that world came first and we came second, and that we are just a reflection of what's happening on the other side. And so for people that want more information, they can go to scientifichealer.com. I offer a free gift. It's a healing audio that activates your body in such a way that it does some of the things that I'm saying. It creates protection. It drains off the negative emotions. It calms the nervous system down. I also have a course, and that course is scientifichealer.com/energize me. And thank you for listening, and I am so honored to be here, and I am so excited. I hope you enjoyed this little presentation of combining vibrational physics with energy healing. So it's the modern with the ancient. Thank you so much.